Aspirations of grandeur continued. Still wary of making any noise, he let himself stand there for just a moment, reveling in the fact that he had managed to get the chair that far. Slowly, his heart eased in his chest. His back itched from the sweat, now drying stiff with salt. He took a sniff under his arm. Phew! He did not smell good at all. Just one more thing to add to his list of complaints. Sitting himself down slowly on the bed, he contemplated his next move. If he stood up on the bed and moved carefully, he could put the chair in place and not have to walk on the floor. There was just one problem. His bed also creaked if you moved the wrong way or too fast. He sighed. He'd gotten this far, too late to turn back now. It was time to finish this. He carefully stood up in bed, one hand resting lightly on the wall next to him. Silence. He picked up the chair, looping it over his other arm as he took tiny steps to the foot of the bed. Silence. He shifted his feet to a wider stance along the edge of the narrow mattress. He held the chair with both hands and lifted it over the foot of the bed and onto the floor next to the wall. Silence. Now what? The back of the chair was facing him, which was a bit of a problem. He leaned forward and turned the chair around so the back was against the wall, setting it down once more on the floor. He eyed the flooring under the chair critically. He couldn't recall if any of those boards creaked when he'd stood on them under the trapdoor, but he'd been less focused on the floor and more on the roof at that point. Regretting that lapse now, he bent forward and pushed down gently on the chair. Silence. He licked his lips, salty from sweat. His throat was so parched that it hurt to swallow, but he did it anyway. The salty saliva helped, a little bit. He was simply going to have to trust that the chair would make no sound. Holding his breath, he lifted his left foot up and over the foot of the bed and rested it on the chair seat. Easing his weight onto the chair, he lifted his right foot up and over the bed. Hovering in place, one hand on the back of the chair, one hand in the air, one foot on the chair, one foot in the air, he thought, this would be the perfect time for Papa to show up. Heart hammering again, sweat once more trickling down his spine, he held the back of the chair in both hands and set his right foot down onto the seat of the chair. Silence. He nearly lost it then, choking on a laugh that would have doomed him completely. He'd done it. He'd made it. Panting in excitement, he craned his neck to peer up at the roof above him. Could he reach it this time? Was he finally tall enough to make it? Por favor, Dio, he whispered into the silence. Steadying himself with his left hand on the back of the chair, he stretched himself up as tall as he could, reaching his right hand up to just brush against the beams of the roof. Yes! 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 Turning the latch, he prayed again that the trapdoor wouldn't be stuck in place. He pushed and felt it move slightly. Grazie Dio. He thought of all the times he'd spent pulling himself up into trees. If he could get a good grip on the outer edge of the trapdoor, he could pull himself up. He knew he could. He just had to. Shaking his arms out to try to loosen them, he closed his eyes and felt with fingertips of both hands along the lip of the opening. With a last silent prayer, he pulled himself up and, using his back head to shove the trapdoor open, managed to scrabble his way out and onto the roof, the underside of the door dragging along his back. Meredith, that hurt. Didn't matter. He'd made it. Letting the door close quietly with one shaking hand, he laid there, gasping, for a few minutes. The roof was steeply pitched, but a flat space along the peak was just big enough to sit on. He moved himself carefully until he could sit up straight, his knees pulled up to his chest. He could breathe. The air was still, but cooler than that in the oven of a room beneath him. The night was silent. He gazed up at the stars and thought, someday I am going to live where I can see them anytime I want to. He knew that, eventually, he was going to have to make his way back into his room and get the chair back in the corner with his desk. But for now, for this moment, he was free. He started to cry. It's funny. Ever since I stopped watching the news, I hadn't heard anything about current events being even discussed at work. I had heard we were all too busy trying to get over jobs done. If I noticed anything at all, it was just that. So it figures that as soon as I read that article at home, I'd walk into the office and into the middle of a heated discussion of what I soon learned was being referred to as the Rosary murder. Did you hear? Isn't it just horrible? I'll bet you they were more than just killed. Oh, how terrible. What kind of a person would do something like that? I made my way past the group of people, standing between the entryway and my desk, determined to not get involved. Hey, Elise, what do you think? Tony asked as I slid by. I gave him my best side eye as I stated, I don't, and kept going. Another voice. Well, I guess you just don't care about that kid. Yes, that would be Sandra. Nemesis was too strong a word for her. She was my constant annoyance, always second opining on anything I said, which is why I rarely talked to her. I stopped and turned to Sandra, projecting my voice to include everyone within hearing distance. Actually, yes, I care about that boy. My heart is breaking, okay? But I can't do anything about it here and now, so there's no point in talking about it, is there? As soon as I know what I can do to help, I won't be talking about that either. I'll be too busy doing it, right? I paused for a moment, but no immediate replies were forthcoming, so I went on to my desk, shrugging off my jacket and purse in one motion smooth with practice. I plopped into my chair and turned on the computer, making a point to pull a file on my desk in front of me and flip it open. Right then, Tony declared loudly. Everybody get back to work. Sheesh, we aren't paying you to stand around discussing the news. The group broke up as everyone went back to their respective desks, low voices muttering as they continued the conversation in ones and twos. He stopped by my desk on the way to his office, murmuring a quiet, I hear you, and then kept going. I smiled. Tony gets it at least, I thought to myself. It was hard, though. Every time I ended a phone call, my mind whirled back to the article. I kept seeing the grainy, black and white photo of a desolate gravel pit, a group of people gathered around an indistinguishable something. My mind skittered away from the image, looking at my monitor for something, anything, to get my attention out of that scene. It was going to be a very long day.